Saludo, mi gente. I hope you are well. So, I was actually like trying to do this video like just for TikTok. It don't work like that. Um, these are just like massive, like big things. Anyway, so earlier today I had like hit an entire wall. I'm like, I hit an entire wall. Um, my my way of I'm a manifesting generator 5-1, and one of the things that tends to happen is that like when I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go, right? There's no medium between that. Like we just go when we're going. When we're going, we're gone. And I was like trying to I was trying to just like let me finish doing this, and I had to text my eldest. If you have not heard of Saltwater Stars, I anyway, you need to go to saltwaterstars.com and follow them. You'll find them on Instagram, TikTok, and Substack as well. But I would say go to their website and just get a reading. They are doing amazing things in this world, and they so happen to also be my eldest, and let me just do one of these moments. This is a mom moment. I cannot stress enough the importance of taking the time to develop relationships with your kids, and the importance of really reflecting on how powerful it can be when your children grow up and become your friends and become humans that you can have such a deep love and respect for, because of the way they've just grown into, I I feel like I want to say so much and I have no words for it, because it's such an honor to know them both. I have 2 children and they're grown and doing their thing, and they hold an ocean of wisdom, and I'm so grateful for both of them. And so my eldest, I was texting and I was like, I'm hitting a wall, and they were reminding me, and they've always been such a blessing in that way, because they also do a lot. They're aware of their human design and do a lot of this beautiful magical work, and just you got to go see it and experience it. And I'm always grateful because they're always sending me information around neurodivergence, and they're always sending me information around, like, if they see things about my human design, about being a 5-1 or about being a manifesting generator, they send it to, they're constantly reminding me in such a really beautiful way that I need, ways to continue to decolonize myself, and ways to also decondition from how I've been like moving and the way I've been creating in the world, that there's some ways and some things that have brought me an enormous amount of joy, and there's so many others that have actually done more harm than good, right? Like, and so I'm like, because one of the things that I've been reflecting on in these past couple of like days, and since I got back from Puerto Rico, is really reflecting on some of the collaborations that I've experienced, and some of the ways that I've experienced like harm and some of the bullshit in some of those relationships. And having had a recent experience that was really, slimy, I needed to step back and say to myself, okay, what's happening here? What has been happening? The thing that I do know, and I've already shared this, is like, I'm not going back. And what I mean by that is I've been doing community work for a really long time, trainings primarily, and circles in all different ways. I did a women's leadership circle, looking at, business from the point of like, you know, social enterprise and businesses like that as an opportunity to transform the world, but they also needed frames of equity and justice, and not just this like white savior thing manifesting fill in the blank. And then secondarily to that, anyway, I'm not gonna go. I just that world. So I did that, um, and worked with like entrepreneurs and women in leadership in that way, and then, you know, did community work in other ways where I was like, you know, working for the YWCA and doing hotline work, and then medical advocacy, and then social justice training was kind of my like my last the last years I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of anti-racism trainings and things like that. And I've done some prison work, and all these different places that I've like shown up. I've done poetry work with students. I mean, just there's things that have been generative and there's things that have been challenging. But being in that world as a witch and as a priestess has been incredibly difficult, has been incredibly painful, because where I live is, well, predominantly white, one, and secondarily, very very conservative in ways of being. There's nothing conservative about me. All right, that's not accurate actually. In some things I am, and some things I'm not. And so, but a tattooed priestess who curses like a fucking sailor and who's intentionally irreverent doesn't necessarily thrive here unless you're constantly curating that into a form that works. And so coming to this place in my life where I have decided that like this last experience wasn't a surprise, because actually I had not in any way, shape, or form have been operating out of listening to my sacral response. And survival is a really interesting beast, because when you're in that space of survival, so now you have to understand that there's this world of work that I'm doing and things that I'm doing, and then there's also all this change that's happening in my personal life, right? In terms of big ass divorce, like awful thing, and then my mom getting sick and passing, and then, you know, it just, there's so much. And so, and I had been really transparent about my journey and my experiences, because I think that that's how we heal. Part of it is being able to share honestly and not bow tie everything like it's a pretty like, oh, we're done, it's finished, you know, or I'm healed, or you know, things like that. Like I had so many, especially early in my work, like I had a lot of argument about the ideology that makes healing look like another thing that you're accomplished at, or fill in the blank, because none of the people around me, nor in my personal experience, did things pan out in that way where it's just like easy, I'm done. I could bypass shit, right? Because when you're first learning those things, you're like, you understand thought, but there's so many other pieces to that. Anyway, back to the point of the story. So having all these experiences and having like been out there in that way and in that fragmentation led me to a place where I'm like, okay, why, like, what is happening, that there's these pattern of relationships that's been happening for a while that, well, one, we're fucking hella toxic. And also in this way that in order to financially survive, and I mean like not financially because I want to go on a cruise. I'm not saying that going on a cruise is you. Let's not do that. But like literally keep the roof over my head, literally like keep things going despite the enormous amount of pain and challenge I've been experiencing. And so you do what you have to do. Those words are so fucking dangerous. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time, lucky enough to be able to do things that I actually like my passion lends itself to. Just because your passion lends itself to something, that doesn't mean you should do it. And that can be very edgy, right? Because it's like, as a manifesting generator, my thing, like, I will be most nourished if I follow my passion. But here's the thing that became challenging and that was not really like established, and there wasn't any space really to spend time really digging into it. And that was that I didn't have enough space to go from like, you know, raising my kids and then, you know, having this like, you know, big event happen and then another one and then another one. And then like the last one, my dad passing, right? And there is this real thing about being able to tap in if your system is dysregulated or downregulated rather. And actually dysregulated, my bad. Dysregulated at such a, you know, high level of experience and trauma and dealing with things. It's going to be challenged. You're going to have vulnerabilities. And I mean that in its very literal, like, definition. To be vulnerable, and I've said this plenty of times, like to be vulnerable comes from the root word vulnare, and it means to literally show your wound. So when we're like, oh, you're being vulnerable with us, no, it's not being emotional. That's not that's not what it is. It's actually showing each other our wounds and that we trust each other enough. And so when there's this like, when you have so much vulnerability happening, right, at a personal level and internal level, then energetically, because if you're doing justice work, if you're doing any type of work that involves change and transformation at a communal level, you are constantly interfacing with the matrix, the field. You're constantly interfacing with the energetic cord, or to me, that thing is a beast, right? Energy of oppression and fill in the blank, right? And so when you have all of that stuff going on, you best believe you're gonna fucking have a hard time being able to kind of like, you know, hear your inner self or really affirm and anchor that, because there's so many things happening. And as a neurodivergent person, not having language for that before, I didn't understand, you know, like I thought for the most part that there was something wrong with me, that, you know, of course, this is not a new thing. And it's not just a confidence thing, right? When you have a neurodivergent brain, your brain functions differently. So it's not a matter of confidence. It's a matter of understanding that your superpowers lie in a different way. Now, I personally call them superpowers, though the struggle, the shadow of those things, of those gifts are real and painful and challenging when you don't have language and or tools, and when you don't have support. And so coming from the place of like, I've been in this like stage, like place of analysis, which I am always in, right? Like one of those things, I'm one of those people, strategy is an automatic way that my brain thinks, and I can reverse engineer things and get to the core, right? Like I'm really good at that, getting to the essence of things. And for me, what wound up happening was that, what happens is that if it's really close to me like this, you know, I can't do the same thing because it's too close. I can observe over time and then do the thing. And so I didn't have language for all of this. I didn't have language for what was happening. I didn't have the human design language years back when I first started doing community work to understand that the projections weren't who I was. It was other people's shit. But what happened for me was I internalized a lot of it and thought that there was something like, you know, I wasn't doing enough. And I was in a really toxic marriage for a really long time that was very gaslighting. And so it was hard to sparse and, take all those things apart. And so as I'm sitting in this space where I'm like, okay, how did I, in very plain language, how the fuck did I wind up in some of the dynamics that I did, right? Like, how did that happen? Coming from a place where I was like, back in the day, younger days, I was very spiritually protective. And you must understand, I come from a lineage of priestesses. I come from a lineage of healers, a lineage of wisdom keepers. And so while the shape of it wasn't like, the official whatever, however we see that, right? But my family, this is, the work we do in the world is healing work for the most part. And so I used to have a very tight, guarded way of operating energetically and spiritually. And there's a lot about that I'm excited to teach about and talk about. But having taken so many hits and not having enough time, when you go from raising your children and then having all these events, there's not enough space for you to really sit with yourself and really check in or get the support and the healing that you need. I went without for so long. And when I mean that I went without, I mean literally without a tight-knit support system, without therapeutic support, without physical bodywork support. I mean, just on a lot of levels. And a lot of the work that I had to do, I did on my own. You know what I mean? I did the best that I could for wherever I was at. But here, now that I'm at this place where I'm like, I'm not going back to that work that I was doing. I will no longer fragment myself for anyone else, because I understand now that so much of that was other people's projections, and that I do not, the genius of being who I am is to be myself fully in its multiplicity. So if you're an MG, you know that you are the fucking, like, you can swallow the world of energy and information at a rate that a lot of people can't. And the way that you're going to thrive and that I'm going to thrive is actually by taking the time to allow yourself to be nourished by the things you're passionate about. Now, connecting that back to the idea that just because you may be good at it or your passion lends itself to it doesn't mean that you should engage in it, because you have to make sure that shit is actually lighting you up. But when your energetic and physical world has been through so much change and so much pain, it actually dysregulates your energy centers in such a way that it becomes difficult to lean into listening to your authority. Now, for me, mine is my sacral. I'm a sacral authority. And being a sacral authority, I know quickly, but I didn't know that I knew quickly, right? I thought I wasn't giving it enough consideration, because what I heard from others, right? Like, I started taking in a lot of that shit. When you go out to do work at this like level, massive level, I've met an enormous amount of people and grateful for every person that I've come across. It's an honor to have been able to teach and to serve and to help empower and liberate. And at the same time, there's like this thing where when your energy systems are destabilized and there's not a solid anchor, you can't hear yourself as clearly and you can't be in listening. And the only way, really, like, not the only, like, only way, right? But one of the many ways for you to ensure that your passion is actually able to generate in a way that brings joy, attracts. And so here's the thing, you know, this idea of attracting abundance, right? Like, we talk about that a lot, and we talk about like whatever. I'm also reading, it's taking me some time to read Joe Dispenza's Supernatural, I believe, right? Which I think it's really good. And I think all these books are really wonderful. And I try to be careful what I take in. And the reason why I try to be careful what I take in is because part of my work is being a thought leader. And it's really important to me that I have a clear enough channel to bring what I'm here to bring, and not need to quantify, qualify, or verify everything I'm channeling, because I recognize that in order to continue the evolution and the change of things, we're going to need new channeled information and not the same thing over, right? Like, not the same type of, anyway, we'll talk about that later on, but I'm gonna go back to my story. But so I'm careful about what I intake and teachings that I intake. I'm very, very careful about that stuff. And because I like to speak from my own mouth and my own words. So, you know, part of like this idea of being able to inhabit the fullness of your energy field and being able to be present in this timeline, you have to understand, and I have to understand, that I need to make sure that I have a clear line to my sacral response, and that I'm honoring it, and that I'm solid in it, and that what I choose to respond to is actually feeding and nourishing me. And for the most part, a lot of my work in community has not been as nourishing in terms of like giving back. Usually, well, one thing, I've never gotten paid. I've never gotten paid sustainably for as long as I've been doing this community work. Now, part of that is not so much about not knowing my worth, but around like some really honest, you know, evaluations around accessibility for organizations or shit like that. And then secondarily, you know, as I can see it now, it's actually, that wasn't meant to be for so long, right? Like it's something that I explored and learned from and then moved on and needed to move on, but I didn't have the language, didn't understand it, right? Okay, fair enough. So as I'm looking at when I'm looking at like, wait, how do I not continue the legacy of burnout that activists and trainers and teachers have in this work? And I realized that part of that was learning that actually that's not for me, right? The pain I experienced in that work, like the frustration, the projections, the harm, right? Like this last experience that I had was like, it sealed the deal. I was like, I am not working with anyone that does not have not only a decolonial praxis, a liberatory one, and a spiritual one. Otherwise, I'm not fucking interested in that way. Not interested. Because I'm not going to code switch and I'm not doing all of that. And I am not going to align myself with folks who at the core do not have a spiritual understanding about what's happening in this world, right? The multi-dimensions and all of that. And so part of creating these boundaries around things and understanding your human design, understanding your astrological context, all the things, the tools that have come that are available to us, trauma informed, neurodivergent, ADHD, bipolar stuff, autistic stuff, all these wonderful resources that we have, you know, that's the translation in the smuggle world, if you will. But in the spiritual realm, it's really understanding the magic that you bring and that you're not meant to fit in, but belonging as a root connection to the greater humanity is an important thing. You may not fit into the colonial project. You may not fit into the, right, like this fucking like super neurotypical, you know, structural thing. You're fitting in is not the deal, but you do belong. And that's really important because that heals and begins to address what happens in the diaspora and what happens at the pain of so much change in family systems because we lose our sense of belonging. And so part of this is like recognizing, oh, wait a minute, how did these things happen? Like, how did I find myself in those things? How have I found myself in some friendships that have not been generative, that have been harmful, that have been one-sided? Like, what's happening? What is happening for me? And for me, there's this like, I've had to and continue to like tap back into like, oh wait, I need to learn what lights me up from this place in my life, right? When I was younger, it was different. I'm 46, so life is different. I'm in a different season cycle stage. And in that, I need to learn to feel in my body about what excites me and lights me up, because only that which excites me, lights me up, is going to be the vehicle by which I am going to be able to do what I love most. And that's teach about healing, teach about transformation, teach about connecting to your essence, connecting to my essence. And for a long time, I wanted to make sure that I was this is like some shit in my head, make sure that I'm in deep relationship with the very thing I'm teaching about, and that I share that because I don't ever want to be one of those teachers that's speaking from a pedestal, right? Where we're like, oh, I'm so done, and this is what y'all need to do to get like, I don't do that. I'm not interested in that. And so for me, there's this piece around recognizing that I love teaching. I love teaching about spirit. I love teaching about dimensionality. I love teaching not only about protection, but about all the connections and all the ways in which we can continue to heal and transform the world that we live in, beginning with ourselves. But in order for me to do that from a place that will not burn me out anymore and will not take from me, is to actually ensure that I'm being lit up and nourished deeply. Now, when you go without for so long, you're like burning rubber, right? And so I will look at the past and honor all the parts of myself and all the pieces of myself and all the different ways that I tried to self-care and all the different, right? Because that's really, as you continue to take off the layers and shed, as you continue to decolonize your like inhabitation, your spirituality, all the things, as you continue to do that and connect to the force field that is your beautiful ancestry and all of those beautiful things, the medicine that is moving through you. To me, the piece of that is like, oh, every stage is going to offer something different. And sometimes it can be really frustrating where you're like, I thought I learned that lesson. I thought I understood that thing. But you have to be willing to always be a student of, right, everything that's moving and going on, so that you're always in learning and that you understand how are we going to create change. And it begins with ourselves internally. And then, right, that begins to impact everything else. And in order to also to touch back on the idea of abundance and things like that, like prosperity and all of that stuff, some of the struggles I've experienced is because I recognize that I have not been able to fully enjoy being like thoroughly nourished and thoroughly resourced. And when you're thoroughly nourished and thoroughly resourced, your energetic vibration draws in that way. And what I mean by that is that whether or not you have like, $1 billion in the bank or not, kind of becomes irrelevant in some ways to your state of inhabitation. And either way, energy speaks and energy does what it does. It attracts energy, right? Like it attracts its own. It's like, and so I feel like if we don't begin to shift that for yourself, I don't know where you're at. I don't know what your experience has been. I don't know how you have been for yourself and with yourself. But what I do know for myself is that where I'm at now, I've never been, and where I was, I'm not going. And whatever tomorrow holds, that is tomorrow if it comes. But right now in this moment, I'm grateful. Right now in this moment, I recognize that these beautiful systems that give us so much knowledge and wisdom help us find language for the ways that we can learn to move that are actually nourishing and energizing, that are actually feeding. And I think that burnout is a huge indication that you are way outside of your fucking line, like way the fuck outside, right? Because burnout is actually the place where whatever the passion, whatever the gift, whatever the assignment was, you have long extended yourself outside of that. Whether you're burning out as a parent, whether you're burning out as, right, like as somebody doing spiritual work, whether you're burning out as an activist, a partner, whatever it is, you have gone the way fuck over out your capacities, and now you're like on threads. And that's not a fair way to be with yourself. It wasn't fair for me. And when I look at my life now and I look at some of my struggles in terms of like, I'm grateful for everything that's happened. Grateful. And what I mean grateful in terms of like some of the really hard exchanges that I've had, or really harmful and toxic collaborations. We don't do that again. But because the place that I'm at, I wouldn't have arrived had it not been for those really fucking awful moments. For the moments of realizing that my sacral authority was speaking to me and I ignored it. And now there's a reason why, there's patterns in my life and trauma and all of that stuff. And so those things continue to get cleared out in different ways and at different levels. But I did not listen. I did not, when it hit me, I gaslit myself and found myself in the same dynamic, which thankfully, right, when a thing happens where it's like, boom, done, it is the opportunity for you to shift. Rather than try to reinstitute and constitute yourself into that thing, allow the thing to come to an end. And for me, being in reflection and looking at like how much I've tried to push, or what I should be doing when I'm in a challenging time, or what that should look like, for far too long, the outside world has informed what that should look like, right? So like, you should be stressed out, you should be in fear, you should be in worry, you should be doing this, that, and the other. There's so many things I've already done that yielded nothing. And that's enough of the proof in the pudding that I need for that particular thought or ideology to be like put to bed, done, right? And so one of the things that I thought was important that I wanted to share was because I think sometimes, or a lot of the time, we are really not generous with ourselves. I know I'm not with myself. I'm like, well, I know this already. Why am I having this experience? Or why am I letting this happen? Or like, Why am I allowing this to engage? Why am I engaging in this? And when I say letting this happen, what I mean by that is that I ignore and suppress my own thing and still show up and stay present in something that's actually already right. Like, I know that it's not for me, and I know that it's not how I want to move in the world. And I can't, we'll talk about that later on in the Altars of Incense membership, because I think that one of the reasons why I'm creating this membership is because I recognize that what's important to me is that as warriors showing up and moving into a place of saging, and what I mean by that is that you are no longer actively in the battlefield, but you are in the place where you are training and you are teaching, because you recognize you've learned some lessons, you got the scars, you got the stuff, right? Like, this is not one of those where you're sitting on some sort of pedestal and don't have the experience. This is for folks who have lived in the experience of the battlefield, which is how we become warriors, right? It's how we become, freedom fighters. It's how we become, because we know the experience. It's not a metaphor. It's not some sort of like, oh, I think you look like you're suffering and you should be whole. It's like, no, I know what the fuck it is to come from poverty. I know what it is to eat bread and butter. I know what it is to struggle deeply. I know what it is to get beat. Like, there's a lot of things that I know and have as a human experience that have been painful, and that fight to survive and to get to a place to thrive is a lived experience. And what happens for us is that we're so used to being in battle that we think that we need to always stay on the battlefield. And when you stay on the battlefield too fucking long, there's so much shit that gets funky and distorted and contorted because you've been in the trenches for too long. And when you're in there really, really, really long, past like the point, I think you know the point, past that point, you know nothing else but the mind of war. And everything becomes a fight. And so creating the membership is for warriors who, like myself, we need to reset our lives. We need to reclaim our essence. We need to come back. We need to walk barefoot for a long time. You know what I mean? Like, we need to reclaim all these pieces because some of the challenges are very real. And you also need tools to help reconnect yourself and reclaim yourself, but for who you are now and the experiences that you have now, and integrate all those things into a place where you can share them with others as teachings, but you can yourself kind of step back and let yourself receive and let yourself experience ease and let yourself experience rest. Because not because you earned it, because that shit is bullshit. It's still like matrixy capitalistic fucking shit, right? To be like, oh, you earned your stripes. There is a degree of that's valid in terms of you can speak because you've experienced and lived. And you can also rest because your life is actually not meant to just be the fight. We wouldn't have teachers if that was the case, right? And we are needed in different ways now. And there's going to be a very necessary, as a woman of color showing up, as a Latinx woman showing up and having conversations with young folks and younger folks that are coming into the work of like community and all of those things. If we're not teaching them and we're not supporting them and affirming the care and the rest necessary, and we're not like, you know what, you got to get to a place yourself where you get to kind of sit in a place of being a sage and like allow yourself to rest and be refreshed and all of those things, because you're not going to be able to sustain what you're here to do if you are not actually receiving, if you're not actually well nourished. If I have to be constantly worried, which I have been, I have not had yet the experience, and this is just really honest, I've not yet had the experience where I didn't have to worry about the roof over my head. That's not a way to live. And many people live like that, right? Not just here in this country, in many other countries. Your sense of home, whatever that may be, however that may look, is a really important component, at least for me. That's me. But I'm also, in my human design chart, my fucking like environment is a fucking cave. So that makes a lot of sense. Now I understand, right? And so anyway, all of that to say that for me, when I'm looking at all these pieces and when I'm looking at shifting and really anchoring myself into this work that I am sharing with you and making spell bottles for you and for me and you, right? And creating, there's so many things that I want to do, and I want to write the books and all of those wonderful things, and I want to teach and do all of those beautiful things in different ways now, much more, connected and whole. All of those things, to do these things, to show up in this way, is going to require me to lean into these beautiful archetypes and language, and to really step into fully allowing myself to live in the fullness of my own expression, right? To let myself be a manifesting generator, to let myself be the heretic, to let myself be someone who is going to help folks take information, turn it into action, which creates wisdom, which is my deepest commitment, is to support and mirror and amplify the wisdom already inherent in you, right? And so to do these things, to step into this stuff, I and you, we have to allow ourselves to move into that space. And to me, the thing is so that as the generations continue to move, and we get better and better at caring for ourselves, at living in our full agency and power and alignment and calling and all of those beautiful things, then it changes how we can show up to this work of healing and change and liberation in the world and in our own local communities, whatever may be the case, because we're actually allowing ourselves to be sustained and allowing that to be generative. So I'm going to stop now, because my shit is always boom, right? Because I think that I remember being really young. I was a child, and I remember thinking to myself that one day when I got older, I was going to make fucking damn sure that people didn't have to go through some of the things I went through. And I'm sure many of you share the same fire. And it brings me so much joy to be here with you, so much joy to do this healing work with you, even if we don't have relationship because your shit ain't right. I still recognize that for me, it's such a deep honor to be able to share and to be able to communicate. And so I do so with all my words. As a poet, words are irresistible to me. They're so fucking sexy. And then no words are also fucking sexy. So I shall end this time and this teaching with a couple of things. 1, you should get a human design reading. 2, I am not coached in that in terms, and that's not my expertise or my experienced gifts. So you should get one so that you can better know those pieces. The information's beautiful. You should get a astrological reading from at Saltwater Stars, saltwaterstars.com. Not just because they're my child, but because they are brilliant and really creating world building, world changing, transforming, empowering, agency filling, ancestrally connected, affirmation filled sessions for other humans to show up in their full brilliance. So you want to do that. 3rd, if you want to, 1, have a session with me, I have urgent, I love this, urgent, acute type sessions for warriors who have been out in the battlefield. It's a 3-hour session. Feel free to go check out the website, thehouseofliberation.com. Soon I should be opening up the membership. And equally, you can, again, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, but mostly get on my newsletter. Let me tell you why, because soon enough, I will be shifting into allowing that to be my version of social media, and where I get to share with you on a personal level and a much more intimate setting And yeah, so there's many ways to engage, but again, get yourself a human design reading. Again, get your life with saltwaterstars.com. And thank you so much for listening and being with me. And I'd love, if you feel so inclined, I'd love for you to comment below, what are you reclaiming for yourself? I know for me, I'm reclaiming not only this beautiful language of the human design, my neurodivergent language, all of the spiritual witchy priestess, Jew witchy priestess language, like all of the things, Latinas, like Puerto Rican, Boricua, like all my shit, my New Rican shit, right? Just a real reclamation that's really anchored in wholeness. What are you in your life, in this shift that's massively happening? What's for you becoming the thing that you are reclaiming in a solid way? I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to witness that, and to know that when we share our stories with consent, and not in that trauma porn way where, you know, we've learned to tell our stories so that other people can, like, you know, we don't do that here at the House of Liberation. We tell our stories with consent, because when we speak our truth and our experiences, we heal each other. So, I love you. Saludos y nos vemos de luego. Adiós.